Hello and welcome to the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz, and today I am joined by my good buddy Dan Viens of the Seahawks Forever podcast. It is Combine Week, Dan. We've got tons of news. We've heard from NFC rivals, NFC West rivals, even in particular, about some of the things going on with their team.
Yeah.
And quarterbacks thrown on Saturday, which is probably the more exciting thing for me to watch. And even some potential trade news. It's been kind of a busy last couple days for our Seahawks and our NFC West. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Always good to be back on with you. And I guess we can expect it. When John Schneider came out last week on his radio show and literally said that tampering happens all week in Indianapolis, and then he was looking forward to getting there because that's when he would be able to start finding out how much free agents are valuing themselves and how much teams are looking for in trade and which players are available and which ones aren't. And so it's kind of the worst kept secret in the league that's when a lot of these discussions happen, because everyone goes to Indianapolis, at least for the first few days, agents, coaches, front office. And so, yeah, it would make sense that some of these things are being resolved and some of this news is breaking while everyone's there.
We get to hear a little bit of that news sneak out. One of the things that was a little surprising to me was that it just seemed like when he was asked about discussions with Geno happening this week, that they kind of seem like preliminary discussions. And I guess I would have expected maybe things to be a little bit farther along, especially considering that, with the bonus, the escalator kicking in at the beginning of the league year, that maybe they'd want to try and do some of those negotiations a little bit more. We saw negotiations happening with Matt Stafford that apparently got to the point to where he's going to be returning to the Rams. So we got that news. Obviously, we know that even based on all the talk, whether it's Mike McDonald, whether it's John Schneider, they're talking as if Geno's going to be back, but there's still that lingering question about at what price.
Yeah, and I guess that's why it makes sense that the date for his bonus stuff is the 16th, when the start of the league year is the 12th, because if they're, it just gives him a little bit more time to see the market in action. Maybe it gives him an opportunity to see what Sam Darnold's value is on the open market, right? Or maybe we'll get numbers on this Stafford deal, because that might be a little bit of a more accurate data point, between now and then. It did seem a little strange, like Schneider basically literally came out and told us that, like, we'll find out what they're looking for. He said something along those lines, either in at the podium or in one of the other interviews that he had. He might be downplaying that. I think they have an idea of what Geno might be looking for. I know this, and we know this about John Schneider. They absolutely have a number that they're comfortable with, and they're not going to move off of that. And so if they found out, what was it, yesterday, I think he said he was meeting with his agent. If they found out yesterday that they're far apart, then there might be some conversations happening today. They're a little bit, more substantial, as far as, because I'm sure they have a plan A, B, C, D, E. And one of those plans is he's under contract. It's $44 million. It's a cap hit we don't want to carry, but we don't have to do anything. And so that's their negotiating stance, I'm sure. But it's got to be resolved in the next 2 weeks.
They have a couple different negotiating stances, though, right? They could outright cut him and make him go to the open market and see what he can get on his own. And they're still, they've cut guys and then brought them back later if they weren't able to find maybe the number that they're looking for. So that is a possibility. There is that potential that he could play on that number. And there's a little bit of potential that, I suppose, if you have to be willing to cut a player because he's above that number that you're looking at, then you have to be willing to do maybe some of the other follow-on things too. And that's why I wasn't too surprised when I saw the report from Corbin Smith this week about the DK Metcalf trade potential, and that they were talking with Green Bay. And whether or not you believe that that report is accurate, it seemed like there were some questions from folks out in the media about whether or not it was accurate or not.
People are fired up. Yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me to know that our general manager maybe talked about a trade with another general manager and maybe worked out the outline of a potential trade like that. and it wasn't that crazy of a trade either, as far as like it seemed within the realm of, okay, the Seahawks, they would get a first round pick, they'd give up a third rounder to acquire one of the Packers receivers, and so it kind of evened out. So I don't know, did anything shock you, I guess, about that report?
The DK report,
Yeah.
I guess just how detailed it got. The Packers thing isn't new. There was reporting done at the beginning of the month that they were one of the teams that was reported to be interested in trading him if he was available. And when the information first came out a couple of days ago, it wasn't that Schneider was out there, grabbing guys by the collar and saying, "Hey, what'll you give me for DK?" People were coming to him.
They're not shopping him, and they're not using language like they're shopping him.
Yeah. And if it's indeed true that Green Bay is willing to consider the 23rd pick in the draft, of course you're going to listen, right? It just, we talked a little bit before you hit record about just how mad people get about that, and I understand the emotional attachment to players. That's something that I probably was a little more pronounced in my younger self than it is now. I think I see things a little bit more balanced between the business side of it and the football side of it. And I've been on the record as saying, and said it again last night after the reports came out, that I want DK Metcalf on this roster. He's the kind of player that I want on my team, and they love him in that locker room, and he adds some of that physicality that Mike McDonald wants his team to play with. But if someone's offering me a first round pick and more at a time when I'm trying to reallocate resources on my roster and change the identity and move it more to a physical team that beats you up front, and I don't have those players yet, then I'm going to consider everything. I'm going to listen to every conversation. It just, that stuff gets out, however it gets out. Sometimes we never find out, but it just, it gets people riled up because everyone has their own idea of what they want their team to look like.
And that's why I guess I didn't get super mad about it in terms of, I mean, I really like DK. I've been advocating for keeping him around too. I think that it would change things a little bit perspective wise if they were to decide to move on from Geno, if they were to try and go into more of a rebuilding mode, which we've talked about on this show, that if you're going to do that, now that you know that you have the coach that you want, and maybe now that you've decided on the offensive coordinator you want to move forward with, this might make sense as the year that you would want to tear it down and then build it back up. And, but the way that John Schneider and company are talking, it seems like they want to move forward with Geno Smith, with DK Metcalf. And yeah, they want to have an idea, I guess, based on value, because I think they're going to want to negotiate with DK Metcalf on a new contract potentially too. And if that number gets too high, then you might be considering at that point, you might be considering a trade too.
Well, and you just, again, from a business standpoint, you have to look at the rest of your roster and how much it's a young roster. And most of it, the core of it, are guys that were drafted in their last 3 drafts, which means a bunch of key players on both sides of the ball are up for possible extensions. And you have to start mapping out 2, 3, 4 years in advance. And so you get into the conversation of, do you want to pay a receiver a 3rd contract at the top of the market? That's where it gets dicey. No matter how much you love DK, no matter how durable and tough he's been, he's going to turn 28 this year. That means if you extend him for 3 years at whatever, 150 million, 120 million, whatever it would be, you're going to be extending him in his year 29 season. So you're going to be paying him into his 30s. And that doesn't always work out at the receiver position. You're also going to need to extend JSN between now and then. You're going to let Tyler Lockett go, presumably. Do you want to go right back to paying 2 receivers $30 million a year? Is that the best allocation of resources when you're trying to get better up front? So, that's a bigger decision where you almost have to, if you're going to be a good general manager, you almost have to take emotion out of it. In a vacuum, do you want DK Metcalf on your roster? Absolutely. But the pieces have to fit.
Well, and you don't have to look all that much farther than San Fran and the move that they made today, because on Saturday we heard during the combine that that Deebo Samuel traded to the Washington Commanders, and that works out. I think I'm kind of disappointed by this, Dad, because I feel like this works out better for San Francisco because they get cap relief now because of the trade. And I feel like Deebo's kind of on that downside, talk about guys that, and they weren't looking to pay a third contract for him, but he's kind of the way they, as physical as they like their receivers to be, they tend to get beat up a little bit. And I think we started to see that wear and tear really build up on Deebo Samuel after he signed this last contract. And so they get a 5th-round pick, they get some cap relief, and the Washington Commanders, they have Deebo Samuel now.
It's interesting. We've been hearing for a while now that the ownership of the San Francisco 49ers wants John Lynch to pay less money, to stop paying guys top of the market. They have 7 guys on their roster that are at or right near, the highest paid at their positions, which is, I think in part explains kind of the fall off this last season, because some of the rest of their roster is, they don't really have that middle class. Some of their depth has been challenged by that. You're about to have to pay your quarterback, a guy that, is going to make $50 million a year, most likely, that not everybody agrees is a $50 million a year quarterback. And then you have, Deebo himself, like he's a guy that relied on athleticism, but he's had so many of the soft core injuries, the soft tissue injuries the last couple of years, getting nicked up, kind of lacks that explosiveness a little bit. And then you had some of the off-field stuff last year with some of the attitude, and they went through that exact same thing 2 years in a row. Really, it was Deebo, and then it was Ayuk. It was kind of a replay of the same story. Yeah. So maybe that had something to do with it too, but I was shocked to see these 29 years old. Like, I'm so tired of time going by so dang fast. Seems like the older I get, the faster it goes by. Like, how did Deebo Samuel become 29 years old? But as a Seahawks fan, I'm not upset about ever, not having to play a healthy Deebo Samuel twice a year anymore. And knowing that they have to divert a bunch of that money now to their quarterback, and also that they might be a little cash strapped. Reportedly, Jonathan Allen was involved in these discussions too, but they couldn't take him back. As much as they want to add to that defensive line down there, they couldn't take Jonathan Allen back because the cash was too much.
Oh, yeah. They are going to be in a tough spot. Part of it is just, like you said, having to pay so many players toward the top of the market. It makes sense with Fred Warner.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Well, it reminds you of the Legion of Boom days a little bit, yep. Right? When you're paying, when you have so many guys who are top 5 at their position, and so it makes sense to pay those guys, you just do it. Like Trent Williams has been a top 5 guy at his position. Fred Warner's been a top 5 guy. I'd argue not so much with Deebo or Ayuk, but George Kittle, definitely a top 5 guy. Quarterback, I mean, he's not top 5, but I think you make some room for quarterbacks when you're able to win with them, and they've been able to do that with Brock.
Pay him yeah, it's the market,
It is. It's tough. So that's going to be it. That's right on the borderline for me of whether or not, if I were a fan in that situation, would I want my team to pay a quarterback like that? I mean, we're kind of in that same boat too, but Gino's not asking top of the market type salary, at least I don't think.
Right. And we know that he's in the twilight of his career, right? He's in the latter half. If he gets this, if he gets let's just call it a 3-year extension, because that's what he did last year, or last contract, that's probably what he's looking at here. It's probably his last one of that length that he's ever going to get, and which might cause him to dig his heels in a little bit. Things could get a little dicey over the next few weeks, but it's a little bit different when if you're a 49er fan who doesn't really believe in Brock Purdy, and they're about to pay him $50 million a year. Well, you're doing that with the understanding that you're going to have to pay him. He's probably going to get 2 more contracts after that. So a little bit.
And on those same lines, not to go back to the Gino discussion, but if Gino were to dig his heels in, and if we found out that another team was willing to pay him on average $50 million a year, I would kind of shrug and say, well, I guess we're in the quarterback market now.
Right.
Even more so than we have been.
They're not going to go above. The example that comes to mind is Frank Clark, right? A very, very good player in the prime of his career, ascending player, productive, at a position that if they moved him off the roster, they were going to be really, really behind on. and needing, because I thought that year they needed to add to Frank Clark, right, and Jaron Reed, and that wasn't enough. But then they trade Jaron or Frank Clark, and it was because they didn't want to pay him $20 million a year. They just had a line that they just were not willing to go over. So I'm sure they have that with Geno too. I just don't know how much leverage he really has. And I find it telling that, the sort of the thing to do nowadays, and we saw a lot of it this week, is go shop yourself. Such and such a team has given such and such a player
Rayshon Jenkins, one of those guys for the Seahawks,
permission. Right? Yep. And find out what your market is. They didn't do that with Geno. In fact, all they've done is the opposite. He's our guy. We're going to work it out. So I don't know if that tells me that they're confident they know what the market is and that they're close and they're going to get it done, or if maybe there's a potential that they're going to be completely taken aback by what Geno wants and things are going to suddenly get kind of messy. We'll find out soon enough, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess part of that again is what those other contracts are. Aaron Rodgers, he's going to have some kind of a market if he's coming back. There's other guys. I mean,
I guess that's up to Pete Carroll, right? Is he the one that kind of holds the cards to Aaron Rodgers?
Sounds like it's maybe between Vegas and the New York Giants, right?
Well, it seemed like the Rams were a real possibility, and that might have even been the first place they turned to if the Stafford thing didn't work out. So,
no, they weren't just going to roll with Jimmy G. That's not what was going to happen.
There are those who will tell you that McVay loves him, so you never know.
Yeah.
But I think the Rams are squarely in this quarterback market now, right? I was talking about that with Bill Alvstad last night. That now that it's official that Stafford's coming back, I think they're going to draft a quarterback this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if they use their first round pick on one. Like, they have to have a succession plan, right?
I kind of thought the plan may have been for them was to let Stafford go and try and get Darnold in free agency, and maybe that was the plan, but maybe Darnold ends up staying with Minnesota. Maybe they're starting to get an idea of what Darnold's market is this offseason, or if
I'm sure those discussions are happening. Yeah, I just keep thinking now that Stafford goes to LA, kind of the dominoes for me is I think Darnold goes to Vegas. Like, we know, I just keep thinking back to 2021 when Jay Glazer reported that if the Seahawks had traded Russ that year, that Carroll had an affinity for Darnold then and would have pretty aggressively tried to acquire him at that point. So if those feelings haven't changed, that might be a fit there. So it's
he'll be the next one.
Let's get rolling. I want to see how this all works out.
It'll be interesting to see what happens to Cooper Kupp, because it sounds like he's not returning, and that the Rams intend to trade him. So with Stafford coming back there, and I think that, based on where they're at, it probably makes sense for them to try and trade Kupp too. But now that Deebo gets traded, what kind of market does that then set for a Cooper Kupp trade?
Yeah, he's a little bit older. He's had the injury history, but I think he's been a lot more productive, more consistently, and a better guy in the locker room. So if Deebo's worth a fifth, can you get a fourth for Cooper? Is it enough for the Rams? I don't know.
Well, it is Combine Week, and whether you've been watching, some of the drills on Thursday, Friday, I tend to wait until Saturday when see the receivers out there, see the quarterbacks throw. That's a little bit more where my interest lies when it comes to the Combine. How about you, Dan? When you're watching today, any of the quarterbacks that you were really looking to watch for on Saturday?
Oh, I like seeing them all. There's so much discussion about how much value does the Combine really have. Do you not want to put too much emphasis on what you see? Guys that, there's a lot of stories over time of guys that jumped up because of their Combine performance and then ended up not making it in the league because they should have paid more attention to the tape than what happened at the Combine. But I think with these quarterbacks, the value of it is you get to see them side by side, and you get to see them throw at the same time. So you can compare their arm strengths, you can compare their releases, their mechanics side by side without pads on and without bullets flying around. In a way that you can't just watching film. And so sometimes a good example today is Riley Leonard had this reputation of a guy that didn't have a very strong arm. I saw something different in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and I thought he showed today that he could hang with those guys, and I thought he was right there in that group where his arm was just as good as Dart, McCord, Ewers. I thought those four were pretty equal today in their arm talent. And so it is an opportunity for those guys to jump up, especially when the top guys aren't throwing. It just gives them a chance to show teams that, hey, I can compete. And I think the best example of that today was Tyler Shuck, a guy who there's been a lot of skepticism about how he's risen up draft boards the last few weeks. And I don't know I don't know where that skepticism is going to go after today, because it's hard to argue, to me anyway, that he had the best arm there and had the best day there. And I don't even think it was close. He just looked like a cut above when it came to arm talent. And that's where I think the combine really can help you, because he said from the outset, he's like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to compete. I mean, he even ran the 40 and he was the only guy in his group that ran it. And so they had to give him a break after the first one so he could run it again. It was kind of a cool moment. He came back and beat it, ran a 4.64 at 6'5". He's pretty nice little blend of frame and athleticism there. But he was somebody
to me too, because the other guy who ran it earlier was Brady Cook. And I thought that Cook, because he's more of a running quarterback anyway, and so I kind of expected him to be kind of in that 4.5, 4.6 range. So he hit the range that I was kind of expecting for speed. And then so when Shuck run it and was 4.64, that was impressive.
Yeah. I don't know why those guys don't run it. It can't hurt them. Like if Quinn Ewers goes out there and runs a 4.8, is that going to knock him down draft boards? I don't think so.
Nobody's going to care. But it could hurt a guy like Milroe, I suppose, who, if he goes out there and runs, like a 4.6, then I think that would probably knock him down more so than if he were a 4.4, 4.5 guy.
That was an interesting one, because I thought he would run, because that's the thing that he's hanging his hat on right now. Right. If he went out and ran a 4.35, then it would just, maybe distract everyone from some of the throws that he airmails. Right. But I wonder, and I haven't heard anything, this is just me spitballing, but I wonder if maybe part of his decision was, I just want the focus today to be on me throwing the football.
Yeah.
I don't want the narrative to be about what an athlete I am. Everyone knows that already. This is what I'm trying to change people's minds about. He didn't do that today, I don't think. But I wonder if that was his approach.
The arm strength was there for Milroe. Mm-hmm. I thought that part, he showed that off well. And as far as the running part goes, he might be saving that for pro day, right, at Alabama. So
right. Yeah, I'm sure he'll run. And I do still think he's a ball of clay that someone's going to take a shot at, and he's got high-end traits. Like it's just a mechanical thing for me. Like he's got, like you said, he's got the arm strength. Everyone was concerned about the small hand size at the Senior Bowl, but they grew by like
they
almost
measured it differently.
They grew by a full inch almost. There's lots of things that they can do in between, but I wasn't concerned about that anyway, because watching him throw the ball live in Mobile, like the way the ball comes out of his hands, there's no concern about hand size. Like he can rip it. It's just a mechanical thing. His feet aren't married to his upper body. And he did throw, I thought later in the workout, he was better going to his right than he was to his left. He really struggled on the out routes to the left and on some of the inbreakers. But then, near the end, some of the deeper throws, that's what he does best. And that's where he kind of showed off. His mechanics are just better throwing the ball down the field. But I thought almost all those guys, even Kurt Warner said in that second group, he's like, they all threw the ball well. Like Kyle McCord, who you saw at the Shrine game, was really consistently good. I thought Jackson Dart was probably the second best guy there to Shuck, which is kind of what I expected. And he had a good day. I thought Quinn Ewers really helped himself. And it was a cool moment with Ewers, because they had Sarkisian in the booth at that time, who was able to give a little bit more context to just kind of the guy that Ewers is and how he works and some of the things he's worked on and what his strengths are. And so that was cool to see. I thought they all had, I don't think anyone hurt themselves today, not even Milroe, because I think what he did is kind of what we've seen and kind of what people expected to see. And they know there's work to be done there.
Yeah. Of the Shrine guys that we watched down in Dallas and then see at the combine, you mentioned McCord. Brady Cook was another one of the Shrine guys. Brosmer, he threw with the first group, and
he had a good day.
I mean, he was fine. I mean, they all throw the ball well. It's just a lot of my questions with a lot of those different guys come in to play. Like with Brady Cook, he's so much of a one read and go type quarterback that I don't see him being like a first 3-round type quarterback. So
Right.
the fact that he can throw, that's great. He can run a little bit. That's definitely going to help him, because that's if he's going to continue to be a one read guy, that's going to kind of put him into that backup quarterback status anyway.
Yeah.
And then McCord, I thought they were all fine. The one guy I'm surprised that doesn't get talked a little bit more about is Will Howard, coming out of Ohio State. And
he was the one I most wanted.
Yeah. He has a lot of the throws.
He was the one I most wanted to see, because we didn't get to see him in Mobile, and he got off to a rough start. He got off to a rough start today. The first drill they ran, they're running out routes to the left side, and he didn't even come close. And then he missed on a couple inbreakers too. And then he settled down. I thought he was better as the day went along. I think that the question about Howard is, he's almost 6'5". He's 230 pounds. Like he's got sort of a 10 years ago NFL prototypical frame, but he's athletic enough to move around. He'll tuck the ball and run in a little bit. They ran some RPO stuff. They certainly did at Kansas State. He ran a lot of that stuff there. But even though he's bigger and presumably stronger than all these other guys in this class, and they all seem to be 6'1", 215, 220. They all are kind of the same mold. He didn't have a stronger arm, or even as strong an arm as some of those guys. So I think that's kind of the concern, because when he went on that run in the college football playoff, he was making tight window throws and killing it, and making more of those kinds of throws on tape than some of these other guys have. Like, that's the knock on Jackson Dart, right? The way the offense.
That's the guy I was going to mention too. I don't think Jackson Dart's arm is any stronger than Will Howard's.
What I'll say about Dart is, and I got to see it up close a little bit. Maybe we didn't see it so much today, but my analogy for him is that he's like a control pitcher, like a Greg Maddux type, where he can rip it when he wants to. Yeah. And Ewers is kind of the same way, but he only does when he needs to. And so sometimes I feel like he leaves some of it on the field, and there's a little bit more in the tank there, which I guess I prefer to a Will Levis, right, or an Anthony Richardson, who just came out there 2 years ago. Those two guys trying to beat each other and just trying to throw lasers all over the field. I feel like it's harder to teach a guy out of that habit than it is, to get a guy like Dart to like let it rip sometimes. But I thought Howard got a lot better as the day went along and had a good day. He's a guy that I like because he has all the other stuff going for him too. The intangibles are off the charts, and he does have that big frame.
And I thought his interview went well too. He seems like a guy who would interview well. Any quarterbacks that you came away from it thinking, I need to go back and watch a little more of their tape?
Brosmer, I haven't watched much tape on him, but I thought, I'd heard that he had, the arm talent was solid. So he's a guy I need to watch more of. And then I keep meaning to watch more game tape of Hennigan. I saw him at the Senior Bowl. He's such an interesting story. He didn't impress me at all during the week. He looked like just a guy, and then he went out and looked like the best quarterback on the field in the game. Yeah. And then you look at what he did at Memphis, and his statistical production all 4 years was so consistent. You can almost cut and paste it, and it doesn't turn the ball over. It's got a little bit of athleticism to him. He didn't run great 40, but he's one of the guys that ran today, and only 3 did. He's just a guy that I keep trying to dismiss, and then he keeps showing me that maybe there's a little something more. So he's a guy that I need to watch more of.
I will say you may save yourself some time. There's not a lot of exciting Max Brosmer tape, but I'm curious about.
In the meantime, then I can watch some Ursery tape. I can watch some of his teammates maybe.
Dylan Gabriel was one for me that I came away from the day going, oh, maybe I need to watch a little more Dylan Gabriel, because he was able to really put some velocity on the ball that I didn't really expect.
I am so kind of stuck in the middle on Dylan Gabriel. Like I want to like him so much, because we certainly saw a shorter quarterback succeed here. Mm-hmm. He's built closer to Russell Wilson than he is to most of the other sub 6 foot quarterbacks we see come out. He's put together well. He's a really smart kid. He's played a ton of football at a high level. You can make the argument that, he succeeded in the same offense Bo Nix did. And the knock on Nix was, well, we don't really know how his game translates to the NFL because he just had wide open guys and ran a lot of check downs and screens and stuff. But he's another guy that, like, I keep trying to write him off as nothing more than maybe a guy with high level backup upside. But he was probably the most consistently accurate all the way through his workout today. Like, and that's his thing. He puts the ball where it belongs, even throwing to guys he's not familiar with. So, like I said, I don't think anyone had a bad day today.
No, there's nobody that I watched and I went, ooh.
Like there's usually a couple guys,
and there usually are those guys. Yeah,
how did
absolutely.
he get in? Yeah, who let him into Lucas Oil?
So yeah, they picked a good group of guys, and it was fun to watch. Anything else you want to say about the quarterbacks before we get on out of here, Dan?
Just that I have absolutely no idea where the Seahawks stand on this and what they're going to do. I do, other than this, if, as we expect, Geno gets kind of what I have in my mind is a 3-year deal, but they tear up this year, right? So it's a 2-year extension, but there's new money on it, and that helps the cap and everything else. And which would have him into what, his year 37, year 38. So it's almost, in that case, too early to pull the trigger on like a draft his replacement type of thing, the Jordan Love plan. Like the Packers kind of did that too early, really. It caused some issues in that building and among their fan base. And so to me, that kind of eliminates a guy like Tyler Shuck because he's already going to be 26 this year. So do you really want to draft the next guy when he's not going to get his first shot till he's 29? So if they are thinking, let's get a guy in place, then I think it makes more sense to aim a little higher, but go for one of the younger guys. And I'm sure we'll have this conversation again before the end of April. But I do think they're looking hard at these quarterbacks, and I guess I'm kind of stammering through this. I guess if you pin me down, they're either going to go aggressively for a guy or ignore it again. That's kind of where I stand on the thing. It's either going to be like Jackson Dart at 18, or they'll just say, let's punt again because we already have our 2 quarterbacks.
And I can understand why that opinion of they'll punt again would be there, because I think that the consistent thing with John Schneider is that I think that he will not take a quarterback unless the value, the perceived value, is actually there, especially in comparison with other potential needs on the team. And it's been obvious that value has never matched up, and unless he's taking a quarterback in the 7th round. I wonder, based on how this quarterback class is structured, because it almost seems like we could see a couple quarterbacks go per round. With last year's draft, it was so top heavy that once you got past that group of initial 6, and they were all really strong, it was a really strong 6. After that, there wasn't a ton of guys where you look at and go, well, there's some development potential there, kind of, sort of, maybe.
It was Rattler in the 5th was the next guy taken, right?
Yeah, did he go 5th or the 4th? Yeah. And then the Jets quarterback out of FSU,
Travis,
was in that range too. Yeah, Jordan Travis. Yeah. And then the guy who was a really developmental type project looking quarterback was the other Patriots quarterback. So and he was a 6th. Yeah. There was just a big void there. I do agree with you. I think this draft will be more layered. And so as I've been doing mock drafts, I typically take a guy in the 3rd because I think that's kind of the value there. There's a clump of those guys we just talked about, 4 or 5 guys that's probably their range. That if you address the trenches well enough, and get a couple dynamic guys before that maybe you take a shot there, because even if you do extend Geno, Sam Howell's in the last year of his deal, and so it wouldn't be a bad idea to add one this year. I've been advocating just start taking shots on guys anyway, until you hit on one, and then figure it out from there, right? Well, and so John Schneider's talked about it all the time.
This feels like the right class to do that. One of these guys should be a Seahawk, but we'll see. We'll see if the draft board speaks to him as he said he wants it to.
We'll have to see. Yeah, I would be more interested in picking one of the guys out of this class than, say, giving up a pick for a guy like Joe Milton from the Patriots, if they would even be willing to trade for him at this point. It seems more like, there's going to be guys that I think are developmental out of this class, and it could be time. This could be the year, Dan.
Right now, my struggle is simply that there's so many guys that I love in the positions that we need the most in this draft.
Sure.
Up front on both sides, tight end, some of those other
draft
positions.
All guards, and I would be just fine.
Right. Yeah. If all you did was draft offensive and defensive linemen in this draft, A+, I'm good with that. And it would justify not taking a quarterback. But if they were able to acquire some extra picks in some way, either by trading a player or trading down, then I think it changes the equation. And I would absolutely want them to take a shot on one of these guys. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
He's Dan Viens of the Seahawks Forever podcast. Dan, what do you got coming up on your show?
I'll be doing a recap tonight on my channel of today. Talk about the running backs and receivers a little bit too. We're not so sure about the running back need in Seattle right now, but it's such a good group. It'd be fun to add another guy to that list, right?
Oh, sure.
But some receivers could certainly come into play, so that's a lot of fun. And then tomorrow's all about the offensive linemen, so I'll be recapping that, and then a full combine recap on Monday. With Michael Thompson and 12th Man Rising. And I'm sure we'll probably work a mock draft into there on Monday as well, a post-combine version. So lots coming up.
Get those mock drafts out there.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely check them out over at Seahawks Forever. And I guess I'm going to have to race you then, Dan, with this show being recorded on Saturday. Can I get this out before you get your show out later this evening? I guess we'll see.
Let's find out. Always good to see you.
There's only one thing left to say. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.